There we go. Okay, we're continuing our study, which is based on a book by Tisha Warren called The Liturgy of the Ordinary. Learning to experience and encounter God in the ordinary moments of life. And so this morning we take up the larger issue of waiting, the particular circumstance addressed in the book is sitting in traffic, waiting in traffic. But we can expand this to almost any circumstance or experience of waiting that we might encounter. When you have to wait, what do you do? How do you handle waiting? Everything from what do you actually do when you're waiting to what emotions rise up in you when you're forced to wait?
Well, after being a children's nanny for 38 years, I usually always have a book.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, I got into the habit of having a book in my bag. I don't have one today. I don't expect to need that at church. But just try. I mean, I started with some young children, and you really, if you don't develop some patience, you kind of go nuts.
Mm-hmm.
And any parent can attest to that. So I just kind of be calm. Sitting in traffic, it really doesn't help to. You might note that some people aren't doing what you might do, but it doesn't help to scream or yell at them. I mean, if I'm in the car, I probably sing.
Hmm.
It's just, I mean, try to be calm, because getting all upset and flustered probably just raises your blood pressure.
Mm-hmm.
I can't afford that.
Okay, so there's the acceptance of it, almost the expectation that it's going to happen. Even planning ahead for it, like putting a book in your purse, carrying a book around with you. Okay. Good. What else?
I think now that we have phones, waiting is easier. Because I have everything. You can do email, you can text your kids, you can play a game, and I have Kindle on my phone, or you can do social media. I mean, you can definitely pass the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for a lot of people, it's the go-to.
Yeah.
When we wait.
So for doctor's appointments and stuff, it's no big deal. But you shouldn't be on your phone if you're the one driving and then.
Julie.
This doesn't really answer the question, but we do. I mean, Art has he says this a lot. He says, take your time, take your time. Like when people are coming and you're about to pass them, I'm kind of like, my strategy is hurry, you hurry, and so I get hurried.
Mm-hmm.
So he does say that a lot, but then sometimes he says, take your time, but hurry. So we kind of say to each other. But so I don't know if that answers the question or not, but.
No, that's good. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a helpful posture to take, to say, there's enough time, and even if we have to wait, there's enough time. It's okay. I saw it over here.
I don't know that it's very healthy, but I'm a person who likes action, and so if I have any delay, you can bet that I go into planning mode. I'm thinking about the next steps. What do we do now? What if this doesn't happen? What if that doesn't happen? How can we make the most of this? But I'm not capable of giving myself the luxury of truly just waiting.
Mm-hmm.
Something is going on in my mind every moment.
Yeah. Even if you can't actually do something, you're thinking about.
Yeah, for sure.
Thinking about doing something. Yeah.
I'll find a different stage of my life. It's different. The more options you have when you're waiting, the more patient you have. But when you don't have any options, that's when anxiety kicks in. Because you see, it's almost like the way you look at it is a matter of life, although it's not. But it's like there is no other option that's going to be done. um, that's why sometimes you see friends, for instance, after a hurricane, the boys in Louisiana, the way they act to get into the stadium, when they were opening the stadium, it's not the same way they act if they have to wait in line on the way.
Mhm.
I mean, put us in different situations or patient. Like right now, if we have to wait for a taxi, we can book. But if there is a crisis and we feel like we are threatened or we don't have any option,
Mhm. Mhm.
or patient, we want to very things.
Yeah, yeah. So the circumstance around the waiting really impacts how we experience it.
Yes,
And
to some degree.
yeah, that's good. Okay.
Yeah, I think it always depends, but sometimes I stew and sometimes I get angry. It just depends.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. There are lots of places where scripture addresses the issue of waiting. Psalm 37 is one of those places. It's addressing a particular circumstance that's calling for waiting. But it's a good way of sort of getting into this topic. So notice how it starts, fret not yourself. We'll see that 3 times in the psalm. Fret not yourself, which literally means something like getting heated up. So angry, frustrated, those kinds of emotions. Fret not yourself because of evildoers. So this psalm is addressing a situation where the waiting has to do with something unpleasant that's taking place and is not immediately being resolved. Fret not yourself because of evildoers. Be not envious of wrongdoers, for they will soon. And so there are a number of places in the psalm where the psalmist is going to say, here's what's going to happen soon, or here's what's going to happen eventually, as a way of helping with the waiting here. For they will soon fade like the grass and wither like the green herb. Trust in the Lord. So the fundamental call during the waiting is to trust in the Lord and do good. Just keep on doing the good things you know you should do. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in him, and he will act. So that's the fundamental promise of this psalm. While we wait, we trust that God will act. He will bring forth your righteousness as the light and your justice as the noonday. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Fret not yourself. So there it is again. Don't get overheated. Don't get frustrated over the one who prospers in his way, over the man who carries out evil devices. Refrain from anger and forsake wrath, emotions that would tend to accompany this difficult circumstance. Fret not yourself, the 3rd time. It tends only to evil. For, here's more promise, the evildoers shall be cut off, but those who wait for the Lord shall inherit the land. In just a little while, the wicked will be no more. Though you look carefully at his place, he will not be there. But the meek shall inherit the land. Of course, Jesus uses this in Sermon on the Mount. And delight themselves in abundant peace. It's interesting, it doesn't come across in our English translations, but the psalm is following an acrostic pattern, which several psalms do, where each verse or each couple of verses begin with the next letter in the Hebrew alphabet. And so it's one of the creative poetic ways for the psalmist to say, I want to cover this topic from A to Z, right? I want to try to say everything I can about it. And probably made the psalm more memorable or more easy to memorize, although it doesn't work for us, but if we knew Hebrew, it probably would work for us. It's addressing this problem when godless people are prospering. So something bad's happening in the world, we want it to end, especially because the people that are involved in it don't seem to be really good people, and yet it continues to go on and on. And so it's trying to help the faithful people to see that, well, just stay loyal to the Lord, be content, continue to be honest in your dealing with people, be generous, be just. And the Lord eventually is going to deal with this. He's going to take care of the faithful. He's going to deal with those who are causing these problematic things. And so what we're called to do is to wait patiently. The overall theme, fret not yourself, found 3 times here. So when we find ourselves waiting, and especially waiting for something difficult to get resolved, the call is to not fret, but to trust and keep doing good, because we believe that justice is going to come out in the end, that eventually those who are doing bad are going to fade, they'll be cut off, and those who are faithful, who wait patiently, will inherit the land. And so we can delight ourselves in God, we can commit ourselves to Him, be still before Him as we wait patiently for Him. So as you hear the words of this song, in what ways do you find this helpful? In what ways do you find this not helpful as you think about waiting?
I mean, we have to guard ourselves from being too passive. When we are waiting, depending on what we are waiting for. For instance, we're talking about justice. We're talking about people who are hungry, people who are in need. While we are waiting, we have to be careful that we don't become complacent or indifferent. I mean, if we are waiting for ourselves, we know our situation, we know our circumstances, we know our resources. We can be or involves the welfare of somebody else while you are waiting for that person's situation to get better, while you are in a much better position, you can become passive and indifferent and complacent. And eventually that's going to work, because I'm patient, that's going to work. But it also is not on the fire. Somebody else in first.
Yeah, so I think Guy really points out one of the key points of tension in Scripture, because there are times when we're called to act quickly because of something bad that's happening in the land, some injustice, and then there are other times when we're called to wait patiently. And so discerning when to do one and when to do the other seems to be really important, because sometimes waiting can be really just an act of the privilege. Well, I'm going to wait while these people are suffering.
Well, I think you said a key word there, discernment. Is it our job just to sit and let God solve all the problems?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we expected to participate in solving problems? What wouldn't be solved without our action?
Mm-hmm.
And so I love this, and I certainly believe the first thing is to trust and be willing to wait. But as we're waiting, we should be thinking, what is our role? And are we fulfilling that role or not? And if we're not, why? And maybe God is sort of waiting on us too, to do our part. So
Yeah. So we might be able to say here that in general, waiting provides an opportunity for discernment.
yeah.
Okay, I'm in the situation where I'm waiting. Is God calling me to act, or is He calling me to wait patiently? And how do I make that decision? Is God waiting on me to do something?
But I want to just add a piece, and I keep saying this, that I'm sorry to be able to put all this on you. But Dale has frequently reminded us there's some jobs that won't get done if we don't do them. So is that the job?
Mhm. Yeah. Good. Anything else from this psalm strike you?
Well, it does a lot of point counterpoint. You know, in verse 1, you know, you talk about fret not, but the second part of that is don't be envious of the people that are doing bad things. So it's also, it's discouraging revenge and encouraging righteousness. You know, the righteousness will come. You know, this is one of those instances where I think the King James hits it on the head. It says in verse 2, it says they shall be cut down, not fade away, not gradually go away, cut down. You know?
Cut off.
Yeah.
No, that's verse 2.
Oh.
Verse 2, it says they will fade like the grass. That's sort of a gradual disappearing. Cutting down means you're gone.
Yeah, yeah. So we see both of those images used here in
But then
Psalm.
in, you know, in 7, it's, or where is it? Verse 8, cease from anger.
Yeah, so the psalmist is pointing out there are bad ways to respond to waiting. There are ways of responding that are only going to make it worse. You know, his language in second part of verse 8, fret not yourself, it tends only to evil. So there are some natural reactions to waiting that are only going to make it worse. And the psalmist is urging us to avoid those because they're not going to make the situation any better. Okay, let me share some content from just Harrison Warren in her book. Trying to get to it here. There we go. All right, so just a few slides from her book. She says, one of my favorite scenes in literature is when the Lily Putchins, is it Putchins? Putchins, there we go, Lilliputians in Gulliver's Travel think that because Gulliver keeps checking his clock, it must be his god. It was Swift's clever commentary on his era's worship of time, hurry, and efficiency, which applies just as easily to us today. By the Lilliputians' logic, my god is my smartphone. But the reality is that I do not control time. Every day I wait. I think she's pointing out something in our culture that makes this all the more difficult, and that is that there are things in our culture that tend to make us believe that we are masters of time. We have control over time, or time has control over us. And so when we're forced into situations where we have to wait, that sense of control is lost altogether, and it's very, very difficult for us. Other cultures around the world are not quite as time conscious, right? Not quite as structured by time as our culture is. I mean, sometimes even here, we might see this in terms of when a wedding is held or when a funeral is held, and different cultures come together and we realize, oh, okay, they don't look at time the same way that I do, right? And so our own culture's view of time can make waiting or not waiting even more difficult. She goes on to say, in my daily life, I've developed habits of impatience, of speeding ahead, of trying to squeeze more into my cluttered day. But the question is, how can I live as one who watches and waits for the coming kingdom when I can barely wait for water to boil? And you might think about the place that impatience has in your life. How often during a day do you become impatient? And even think about electronics. When you go to Google and you type in a search query, and it takes 3 seconds rather than 1 second, to pop up 10 million responses to that, you're thinking, why is this so slow?
Well, I think something Julie said, Art says, take your time. It kind of sounds to me a little bit like be safe. And what John said about, if you're stuck somewhere, you have to wait, you're making a plan, or you have a plan. I have weird little plans for lots of things. it's just, but I try to remember when I'm thinking more clearly and not just getting angry or something. All the times I thought I knew best and what I messed up in that process. And all the times that something happened and God brought something good out of it. Or God saved me from death, which would have been possible in some situations. And I just try to live with the fact that I don't control these things, but God's in control and he loves me. And I can trust him to figure it out. So when I'm really thinking and remembering these things, it can calm me down because I'm like, okay, I don't have to solve this and I can't anyway. So why be upset about it?
Okay, so sometimes in our rush to act, we might actually get ahead of God. We might end up making the circumstance worse. Whereas if we just stepped back for a moment and waited for a little bit, we make space for God to do whatever he's going to do. And that's difficult.
Be quiet and see if something comes that might be from God.
Yeah, Scott.
You know, when John mentioned discernment, often I think impatience and discernment are opposite poles, you know. The more time you have to think about something, perhaps the more discerning you're going to be about it. I mean, imagine if every time someone flew off the handle and wrote something really hurtful on Facebook, they decided to wait a day to do that, you know, it would transform the world.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
Maybe the first thought in our mind, especially if it's an angry one, is not the best.
Wait, take your time. We're gonna have to get t-shirts printed out. Take your time, artist season. Theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar, it's a mouthful, suggests that impatience is at the root of all sin. He explains the central role of patience in the Christian life. God intended man to have all good, but in God's time. And therefore, all disobedience, all sin consists essentially in breaking out of time. It's an interesting idea that impatience is the root of all sin, our inability to wait for what God says is good, is the root of all sin. Patience is the basic constituent of Christianity. The power to wait, to persevere, to hold out, to endure to the end, not to transcend one's own limitations, not to force issues by playing the hero or the titan, but to practice the virtue that lies beyond heroism, the meekness of the lamb which is led. Think about Jesus. Can you think of some ways in which, well, let's just think even broader than that, Jesus or God. Think of some ways in which Jesus or God practiced patience or waiting.
I think of like Abraham and Moses, because God's like, listen, I'm going to do this thing, and then they're like, well, what if this happens, or what if that happens? Well, where Lot starts negotiating with God about, or Abraham starts negotiating with God about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. What if there's 1,000 people? Well, wait, what about 100? I can picture God just doing this, drumming his fingers, going, okay, when are you gonna finish? What if there's just one? He's like, fine, if there's just one, I won't just, it's like, I can picture pushing God's patience. He just like, I told you to do it. I told you it's gonna be all right. Just go do it.
Okay. So there may be times when God is impatient with us.
And he says to Abraham, I'm going to protect you. But the first time Abraham runs into trouble, he goes, that's not my wife, it's my sister. You can have her. And God's got to protect the people that don't even worship him.
I'm thinking about patience applied to God in the sense that God understands God has the power over time. To me, I think God sees beyond what we can see. And the notion of patience is our lack of fully understanding time and what happened in the future. I'm just wondering if patience applies to God.
Yeah, so he certainly has a perspective which makes waiting easier. If we assume that he knows all things ahead of time, he knows how things are going to play out. We would all probably wait easier if we had that knowledge. Of course, we might also be overwhelmed, because then we'd know some bad things are going to happen as well, and we'll wait for them to happen.
Robert had English.
Oh, go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, I think Jesus must have been patient when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, praying before he died, staying up.
Very good. Yes, that's a good example. Thank you, Robert.
I want to pick up on what Robert said. I mean, it's not my will, but thine be done. And I think the enormous patience is with Peter, James, and John, who are the people he trusts the most in his greatest ordeal. He expects they will be there with him. Their eyes are heavy and they fall asleep 3 times. And he doesn't even particularly rebuke them because he knows that's human nature. We're limited and you know, you don't fully understand what any other person is going through. And we often let one another go. And he just accepts it.
Yeah.
It's the right thing to do.
Yeah, Jesus had extraordinary patience with people. In essence, waiting for them to become who they were created to become. And of course, we have examples of Jesus speaking very harshly to groups or individuals. And yet over the course of his ministry, you see a vast amount of waiting on people. You think about his life as a whole. So much of his early adulthood, childhood and early adulthood is spent in Nazareth. And we know very little of what that life was about. It was essentially a time of waiting, right? What we know about are the 3 or so years of his public ministry, and most of his earthly life is spent waiting for the right time to move, to act, to serve. And then even when he gets going, he doesn't move at the pace that most people would like him to move, right? He starts spending most of his time with the wrong kind of people. And so other people around him are impatient about that, because that seems like a waste of time to spend all your time with these unsavory people and not with the religious people. And then there's the whole issue of the Romans, whose presence is quite unsavory and viewed as contrary to the will and the rule of God. And people are just waiting for Jesus to do something about it. And he refuses to do it. And then he ends up being executed as a common criminal. His whole ministry, from the perspective of some groups around him, was really just this slow, agonizing path to something that no one cared for in the end anyway. What they wanted was a king. What they wanted was a ruler. What they wanted was someone to take charge. And Jesus refused to do that. It's interesting, in John's gospel, 3 times John records of Jesus that his hour had not yet come. So there were times in his own ministry where people were pushing him to do something or to be something or to say something, and Jesus refused because his hour had not yet come. He was able to live his life patiently because he had a sense of divine timing and divine purpose in his life. And so he didn't have to rush into something that wasn't his to rush into. And yet those things that were his, he never hesitated. He moved quickly and decisively. Going back to the Old Testament, God waits till Abraham's about 100 before he grants the fulfillment of this promise that he's made with Isaac. He waits till Moses is about 80 before he calls him to lead the people out of Egypt. He allows Israel to wander for 40 years before leading them to the promised land. There's this 400 years of silence between the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament, where there's just a lot of waiting. There's a lot of waiting in the story of God and humanity. And it's part and parcel of what it means to be a follower of God. I love this prayer. It's a Jesuit prayer by Pierre Chardin. His book is called Hearts on Fire. And so he writes about the slow work of God. Sometimes God works quickly and decisively, but many times God works very slowly. So he offers this prayer. Above all, trust in the slow work of God. We are quite naturally impatient in everything to reach the end without delay. We should like to skip the intermediate stages. We are impatient of being on the way to something unknown, something new. And yet it is the law of all progress that it is made by passing through some stages of instability, and that it may take a very long time. And so I think it is with you. Your ideas mature gradually. Let them grow. Let them shape themselves without undue haste. Don't try to force them on as though it could be today what time, that is to say, grace and circumstances acting on your own goodwill, will make of tomorrow. Only God could say what this new spirit gradually forming within you will be. Give our Lord the benefit of believing that his hand is leading you, and accept the anxiety of feeling yourself in suspense and incomplete. And so there are ways in which God is at work very slowly in our lives, in our churches, in this world. And waiting becomes part of following this slow work of God. One last slide here by J.I. Packer from his book, Knowing God. He says, wait on the Lord is a constant refrain in the Psalms, and it is a necessary word, for God often keeps us waiting. He is not in such a hurry as we are, and it is not his way to give more light on the future than we need for action in the present, or to guide us more than one step at a time. When in doubt, do nothing, but continue to wait on God. When action is needed, light will come. And so I think that's a helpful way of framing some of the things that we've talked about in terms of waiting and acting, and discernment here, that we wait on the Lord, waiting for the light to come, and when that light comes, we move ahead. Any closing thoughts on waiting? All right, thanks for being here. Amos, Craig, and Robert, good to see you this morning.